All right, what do you guys think of this week's reading?
I felt like it was a kind of a weird place to end. I don't know if any of you kind of like felt like it was just a kind of a jarring place to stop. Like there's nothing about it that like really signaled it was over or finished. So, and I remember that the first time I read it too, I was kind of like confused at where it left off. Like it didn't feel like there was a moral or really anything in particular it was left with. It just kind of stopped in the middle of something.
I was just gonna say the same thing. Like it feels kind of abrupt. Like he just stops the book and you're just like, oh, that's the end of it. We're not like, what was the whole, like, was there something else he wanted to say and he wasn't able to? Or like, how does this resolve to his son directly? I feel like towards the end, he had a little bit more talking towards his son, but not entirely, which we know that this is to his son.
Do we know if there's like a sequel to it? Because I feel like if he wrote a second book, that would make more sense for the way it ended. But if he didn't, then like, I don't know. But it would make sense if there was a second book, I guess, more than if there wasn't.
I don't know. Not that I know of.
I do feel like the theme that we've talked about, the Dreamers theme, does kind of get answered a little bit on page 151. It talks about how, like, a lot of times he was talking about how much the Dreamers have kind of like messed up and how like they weren't correct in their thinking. And here he's telling them that I can't do anything. He's like saying, I can't do anything else to try to make the Dreamers think a certain way. Basically, they have to learn that they're going to, they're not going to be able to move forward as long as they're doing the way that they are.
Yeah, I kind of thought it was interesting how he was like, at the beginning of the book, it almost seemed like everybody was striving to be a dreamer, but then at the end of the book, he was like so opposed to their lifestyle. Did anybody else kind of pick up on that?
Yeah, I feel like that shift, for me, that didn't really stick out to this part too, but I feel like that shift happened looking back, that last section that we read, like the whole France thing. I think that was last section, right? Or 2 sections ago. But he starts talking about the dreamers and like how it had like he's seeing it from a different perspective, and I feel like he changes his stance on it.
Somewhere around there is also where he said it's better to be white than to be free. Is that how he said it one time?
I think he said something like that. He's like, they want to be, the Dreamers would rather be white than be free.
Mm-hmm.
I think is what, yeah. I feel like this whole last chapter, like at the chapter as a whole, so like this last section that we read, and then the one previous to this, the whole last chapter, chapter 3, he kind of like totally changes views from telling a story to focusing in on Prince's mother, like Mrs. Jones, and how like she was doing everything right. Like she was how everyone else around her thinks that they should act. She was doing everything right, but yet she still, like, her son still ended up being the one that was killed. If that makes sense.
I also wonder if like that viewpoint of like, oh, she did everything right and her son still got killed. Like, I wonder if that's more of a view that's present because he's not a Christian. Because like, at least from my mindset, it's like, just because you do something right or you do something like that's not going to bring you like rewards or anything, or like make it so your son doesn't die. Like whatever God wants to have happen is what's gonna happen.
Yeah, I agree with that. I feel like part of it was she was saying like it wasn't like they were living in like a rough part of the neighborhood or anything. I think that's more of what she was getting at. At least that's what I picked it up as like they were a wealthier family and he like had a better life than some people who have like more of a dangerous life. I don't know if that makes sense.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I hadn't really thought of it that way. I guess I thought of it a little more like as a more encompassing thing, like on page 150, like after Coates has left all of this and is just remarking on it, he talks about how he was like sitting in the car and he's like, I thought about Dr. Jones's predictions of national doom. And that kind of solidified in my mind that like this is something that she sees as a bigger problem. It's like she did everything right. She did what she was supposed to do. Like the different things we were talking about earlier in this book, like she didn't antagonize like and provoke things, and this still happened, and that was, I think, her saying is like this is a larger issue. This is far beyond the scope of this one incident, and more of it's a crossfire thing than the heart of the issue.
I agree with that because like if you go on further from when he's like what he's thinking about while he's driving away, as he passes like the different areas in Chicago, he's like telling his son, make sure you struggle for like the memory of your ancestors, struggle for the wisdom, struggle for the warmth of Mecca, struggle for your grandmother and your grandfather, for your name, but do not struggle for the dreamers. And then like, so he's like saying, struggle, do the same struggle that she went through, make a name for yourself and for your people, but don't worry, like don't do it for someone else, like do it for yourself, don't do it for so that you're accepted by the dreamers in a way. Does anyone know what fear he's talking about on the last page, on the last sentence? He's like, the abundance of beauty shops, churches, liquor stores, and crumbling houses, and I felt an old fear. Through the windshield, I saw the rain coming down in sheets. What is the old fear he's specifically talking about?
I
think
took it
that's
as just like,
Talking the way I took it was
sorry,
go
Emily.
ahead.
I was gonna say, I just took it as like the same theme of fear we've seen since the very beginning. Because like the beginning of this book, like there was a heavy emphasis on fear, and then it kind of moved to anger, and then it kind of moved to resilience. And I just took this as kind of like bringing it full circle.
I took it a little bit like that for sure. That was like my first thought. But I thought of it more as like a trauma response type of thing. Like he's seeing all these different things that he's described in past chapters, like the abundance of beauty shops, the church, like all those things that you just described right there. And it reminds him of all the things he's seen and gone through, like the whole Prince thing that he was talking about at the beginning of this section, and other things, and just seeing these marks of the places where it all happens just like brings it flooding back to his mind. And I think that's specifically what he's talking about, but I think more holistically, like he's talking about what you were saying, like that generic overarching fear that we've been talking about all of these meetings.
Is that what you were thinking, Emily?
Yeah, I was just gonna say it was probably more like a used as a conclusion wrap up tool.
I also think he's a writer. He's definitely a writer, and I think there's a lot of he repeats himself a lot, and there's a lot of drama in that repetition. And I feel like maybe I didn't take it quite as seriously as a lot of you guys, because I was like, oh, this is the same thing that he's been talking about this whole book. It's just how he just wanted to end the book with some mention of that thing he's been talking about. The theme of fear has been probably the main theme of the entire book. So I was like, oh, it's probably important to him that we end the book with some reference to that fear.
I mean, it makes sense that he would want to bring in fear at the end, because I feel like was like, if you look at it collectively, like each meeting we talked about how fear was a theme for the most part. And so I feel like you could say that the overall theme of the book was fear. So I feel like it makes sense that he would bring it up one last time.
Do you guys feel like his view of like religion or Christianity had changed at all throughout the book? Because I noticed like here he mentions like pray for them, being the dreamers, if you're so moved, but do not pin your struggle on their conversion. Obviously, he doesn't mean conversion in the way that we would. He's not talking about religion, but still just like the mentions of using the word pray and conversion. I don't know. Do you think his idea of Christianity or religion had changed at all?
I kind of took it the opposite way, because like I kind of felt like in the beginning he was more willing to like understand that people had to like that's their way of coping into coping mechanisms, like was to go to the religion. But towards the end he was totally against it, way more than what he was towards things. So yes, maybe he uses those words, but I don't think he actually means it in towards like religion, but just rather just stating the facts of like how you could do it for them.
Can I pose more of a wrap-up question for the book? Little, or was there more things you want to say on that topic?
No, go ahead.
So we've talked about fear like each one of these sessions, and I've been like, when I'm doing my little write-up thing after this, I always think about like, what is the other themes that we see in this? There seems to be like one different thing we talk about each time, but like overall, what do we think? Is it like, I don't think it's just fear, but I can't put my finger on like what the other theme or themes would be.
I go back to the theme of fighting for, like, over the course of the book, we haven't really talked about it as a theme, but like looking back over the entire book that we've read, he often talks about how he was searching for answers and like fighting for like an understanding. And now I feel like he's kind of passing that on to his son. Like he did as much as he could and he tried to prepare him as much as he could using this book. But then like towards the end, he's like, you need to fight for it yourself. You need to find your answers yourself, just as I did. So I feel like that's kind of a theme he's been constantly talking about, where you need to fight and understand what you believe and how you're going to react to everyone around you.
I think I've written about anger, especially in the one where Prince died, and helplessness, especially like in that scene with the elevator when the white guy said, "I could have you arrested," without even knowing what was going on. And he like spent quite a while sitting on that and writing on like the utter helplessness that he has just because of the color skin he was born with and the assumptions people make, the bias people have for that reason. I think those are probably two that I've referenced in our like review pages the most.
Yeah, I think those are a good way of summing it up. That and what Sydney said, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Did anybody have any just remarks about the book as a whole, or like the specific chapters seem like a lot of summary. Like thoughts about, I don't know, what would you take away from this? Like, I know personally, it's different talking about all these problems and like going through the modules and stuff. But for me, listening to like the words of someone who's actively struggling through it, both like intellectually and just physically presently struggling through it, it just gives you a lot of insight. I don't know, what are your guys' takeaways or insights from the book?
I really liked how he was like talking from an atheistic point of view, because I don't think I would have read his perspective if it wasn't like for another class. So that was really interesting. But yeah, I liked it. I don't know if I would ever pick it up on my own, but it was very interesting just to see his perspective and how he was writing to his son, but it didn't really seem like he was writing to his son all the time.
I'd agree with like the fact that I think it was very informative, but probably not my like first choice in book. But I mean, for what the purpose was, I feel like it definitely served its purpose.
Yeah, I would say along the lines of what you said, Emmeline, and I think Tabitha, 1 or 2 weeks ago, you kind of referenced this, and I thought this was really insightful. You had said like the fact that we're reading a book that does not have any Christian overtones or undertones causes the fact that like when he's writing about like Mabel Jones and her faith and how she still has more like solace and resolution than the writer does, and she's a Christian, like the fact that even an atheist can't avoid writing that, like even not on purpose, means a lot. I think that was probably my favorite aspect, was just the fact that like it came from an atheistic view, and yet when we're reading it from a Christian worldview, we can even still see, oh, but we do have a piece that he doesn't even have. I thought that was really interesting.
I think a personal takeaway that I got from the whole book was with the whole atheistic view is realizing like, okay, this is him coming at it with a like without God as his like kind of like as his rock. So then how would someone else in his same position but with God on their side react? Like would they react the same way? Would they push for the same things, or would they kind of take a different opinion, or how would they stand reading his book but yet they were going through the same thing? So it kind of led to questions. I don't know if I'll ever get the answers to them, but like a place to start wondering and being able to further learn and willingness to learn about what they've gone through and learning from an atheistic view from to a Christian view.
Would you guys say this book changed your perspective on like minorities or the Black minority at all?
I think you can't really read someone's personal experience with just about anything without being affected. It might not have been like a 180 change in my view on life, but like someone else's thoughts and insights brings humanity to the issue. And I guess that was basically a reiteration of my takeaway, but yeah.
Yeah. I would say the biggest takeaway for me regarding like seeing it from someone else's perspective is I don't think I realized the fear or the helplessness that he, as a representative of that community, feels Because I know to me, if anything, I tend to feel a little bit like more of, well, uh, maybe more afraid of like Black men, especially if they're like big, burly. Like I'd probably be more, but I don't know that I would. It'd probably be about equal. But I definitely like, I feel more afraid of them sometimes, probably because I don't know how they view me. So it's kind of like a mutual, we feel afraid and helpless of like of each other, especially after everything, like all the riots and everything that happened around George Floyd. Like I was like, does everyone see me as a white racist now? And they're like a white supremacist. And I got fearful of a lot of them, not really realizing that a lot of that was stemming from a long rooted fear of whites. Like I would know that, but this story gave a much more like palpable example of what that fear on their end looks like.
Yeah, I think that's interesting because I think Ashlyn, it was you last week, and who said that there's often like this unspoken like connection between people from the same group or from the same background. So I think it's interesting that that can work the opposite. Maybe not mistrust, understanding that you don't have that understanding. So I think it's interesting. It works the opposite way too.
Can you
Yeah.
say that again? You cut out really bad.
Oh, sorry. I think whereas you have a lot of people from the same culture have that innate understanding that these other people are from their same culture and they have that connection, kind of like Ashlyn was saying last week. But a lot of there's that sorry, I'm trying to figure out how to say it again. It works the opposite way too. Like there's that understanding that you don't necessarily have that common ground. And I think it
Yeah, you're saying like just like there can be a mutual bonding and connection response before you know someone within like a community, minorities, same ethnicity or whatever. Similarly, before you know someone opposite or different, like minority groups or white and a minority group would probably are often like avoidant and fearful and resistant as a react as like a first reaction instead of first reaction being connecting. Is that kind of what you're getting at?
think so. Or it's not even
Yeah.
necessarily like an innate mistrust. It's more just the understanding that you don't have that in common. Like you don't
Yeah.
have that immediate connection. So it's more just the lack of that camaraderie immediately, as
Yeah.
opposed to anything inherently negative, I guess.
Mhm.
Do you think that's in part because of like our history and like how we're so hyper aware of how we treat other races now, just because racism is such like a big hot topic?
I think every time there's something like that, every time there's a shooting or something like that, it definitely like spikes for a while. And I don't think we'll ever see it fully resolved on this side of heaven, sadly. I think there'll always be mistrust, racism. I think it definitely depends on the community, each person's upbringing, each person's personal experiences and their family's experiences and stuff. But yeah, I would say so. I remember meeting a girl at the school I went to before I went to Dort, who I think was an international student or had immigrant parents or something like that. And she was Black. And I was asking her some questions about her like story and stuff like that. And she was really honest, which I appreciated. It hurt a little bit, but she said, like, because of our difference in skin color, and she was like dark, just full African American, or I don't know her exact ethnicity, what she wanted to be called, but something like that. She said, I already know, I don't know if she said I've decided or I know or something like that, that we'll never be close. was like, wow. I didn't even fully understand. I don't still fully understand, but I think I understand a little bit more now but I don't know. It just surprised me. It's not something I can 100% relate to.
All right, well, it's 8. So is there any last thing anybody wants to say?
I don't think so. Thanks, Ashlyn, for saying that, especially, yeah, we don't have much more time to jump into it, but yeah.
Yeah. Thank you guys all a ton too. It was a good
All right.
group.
If that's it, I'm gonna end the recording.